Good evening and welcome to the Legends of Smooth Jazz. I am your host, Jason DeCanio. It is Saturday night, January 28th, 2023, and we are on episode number 4 of our great program. I hope you enjoyed the 3-part series of Miles Davis. According to our views, it's proven to be a very good first 3 parts, first 3 episodes. Thank you for your continued support. Tonight we have with us one of probably the greatest drummers in the world, known for his jazz drummer, songwriter, conductor, and band leader. He's considered one of the most influential drummers of all time. And he was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And he discovered his affinity for jazz music at a young age and began drumming at the age of 2. He began playing jazz in 1937, working with acts such as Bunny Berrigan, Artie Shaw, Tommy Dorsey, Count Basie, and Harry James. From 1942 to 1944, he served in the U.S. Marines. From 45 to 48, he led his own orchestra. And in 66, he recorded a big band-style arrangement of songs from West Side Story. He's also known for virtuoso technique, power, and speed. And he was an advocate of the traditional grip, though he occasionally used match grip when he played the toms. And despite his commercial success and talent, he never learned how to read sheet music, preferring to listen to drum parts and play them from memory. Who we're talking about? The man who passed back in 1987 at the age of 69, born on September 30th, 1917 in New York City. We're looking at our series on Buddy Rich right now on the Legends of Smooth Jazz. Welcome to the show. Episode 4 is upon us and ready to go on this Saturday night, January 28th, 2023. I'm your host, Jason DeCanio. Hoping you had a great, tremendous week as we wrapped up the first 3 shows with Miles Davis. And now we're going to be looking at part 1 of the legacy of Buddy Rich. This should be fun. One of the greatest drummers ever to grace us in the jazz genre. But Rich was born in Sheepshead Bay, Brooklyn, New York, to Jewish parents Bess Skolnick and Robert Rich, both American vaudevillains. And before he turned 2, he was part of his parents' act on vaudeville. But on breaks, he would sneak into the orchestra pit and try to get the drummer's sticks. Rich would often sneak into jazz clubs at an age when he looked old enough to sit on the drum set. He was on Broadway as Baby Traps, the drummer wonder at age 4, playing the Stars and Stripes Forever on a drum. He was a singer and tap dancer. In his teens, he led a band and toured in the U.S. and Australia. And at age 15, he became the second highest paid child entertainer behind Jackie Coogan during the 1930s. His jazz career began in 1937 with clarinetist Joe Marcello, and he became a member of big bands led by Bunny Berrigan and Artie Shaw. When he was home from touring with Shaw, he gave drum lessons to a 14-year-old Mel Brooks for 6 months. At 21, he participated in his first major recording with Vic Schoen Orchestra, who backed the Andrews Sisters. In 1942, Rich left the Dorsey Band to join the United States Marine Corps, in which he served as a judo instructor and never saw combat. He was discharged in 1944 for medical reasons. After leaving the Marines, he returned to the Dorsey Band. In 1946, with financial support from Frank Sinatra, he formed a band and continued to lead bands intermittently until the early 1950s. Following the war, Rich formed his own big band, which often played at the Apollo Theater and featured backing vocals from Frank Sinatra. In addition to playing with Tommy Dorsey, he played with Benny Carter, Harry James, Les Brown, Charlie Ventura, Jazz at the Philharmonic, and Charlie Parker. 1955, Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich recorded the collaboration album titled Krupa and Rich, which featured the songs Bernie's Tune, in which they traded drum solos for a total of 6 minutes. From 1966 until his death, he led successful big bands in an era when their popularity had waned. He continued to play clubs, but stated in interviews that the majority of his band's performances were at high schools, colleges, and universities rather than clubs. He was a session drummer for many recordings, where his playing was often less prominent than in his big band performances. Especially notable were sessions for Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong, and the Oscar Peterson Trio with bassist Ray Brown and guitarist Herb Ellis. In 1968, Rich collaborated with the Indian tabla player Ustad Allah Rakha on the album Rich Allah Rakha. He performed a big band arrangement of a melody from West Side Story that was released on the '66 album Swinging New Big Band. The West Side Story melody, arranged by Bill Reddy, highlighted Rich's ability to blend his drumming into the band. Rich received the West Side Story arrangement of Leonard Bernstein's melodies from the musical in the mid-1960s. He found the music quite challenging, and it took him almost a month of constant rehearsal to perfect. It later became a staple of his live performances. A 6-minute performance of Prologue Jet Song from the Suite, performed during Frank Sinatra's portion of the concert for the Americas on August 20th, 1982, is on the DVD Frank Sinatra Concert for the Americans. 2002, a DVD was released called The Lost West Side Story Tapes that captured a 1985 performance of this along with other numbers. A live recording of the Channel 1 Suite is on the album Mercy Mercy, recorded at Caesar's Palace in 1968. The album was acclaimed as the finest all-around recording by Buddy Rich's big band. In the 1950s, Rich was a frequent guest on The Steve Allen Show and other television variety shows, most notably on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. Rich and Johnny were lifelong friends, and Johnny Carson was himself a drum enthusiast. In 1973, PBS broadcast and syndicated Rich's February 6, 1973 performance at the Top of the Plaza in Rochester, New York. It was the first time thousands of drummers were exposed to Buddy in a full-length concert setting, and many drummers continued to name this program as a prime influence on their own playing. One of his most widely seen television performances was in a 1981 episode of The Muppet Show, in which he engaged Muppet drummer Animal, performed by Frank Oz, drums played by Ronnie Verrell, in a drum battle. Rich's famous televised drum battles also included Gene Krupa, Ed Shaughnessy, and Louis Bellson. Perhaps the most viewed television appearance was on Here's Lucy in the 1970 episode Lucy and the Drum Contest. Rich cited Gene Krupa, Joe Jones, Chick Webb, Ray McKinley, Ray Bodock, and Sid Catlett as influences. He usually held his sticks with a traditional grip, and he used the matched grip when playing floor toms around the drum set while performing cross stickings, crossing arm over arm, which was one of his party tricks, often leading to loud cheers from the audience. Another technique he used to impress was the stick trick, a fast roll performed by slapping two drumsticks together in a circular motion using taps or single-stroke stickings. He often used contrasting techniques to keep long drum solos from getting mundane. Aside from his energetic, explosive displays, he would go into quieter passages. One passage he would use in most solos started with a simple single-stroke roll on the snare drum, picking up speed and power, then slowly moving his sticks closer to the rim as he got quieter, and eventually playing on the rim itself while still maintaining speed. Then he would reverse the effect and slowly move towards the center of the snare while increasing power. Though well known as a powerful drummer, he did use brushes. On the album The Lionel Hampton, Art Tatum, Buddy Rich Trio, he played with brushes almost exclusively. In 1942, Rich and Henry Adler wrote Buddy Rich's modern interpretation of snare drum rudiments, which is regarded as one of the more popular snare drum rudiment books. Adler met Rich through a former student. Adler said, "The kid told me he played better than Krupa. Buddy was only in his teens at the time, and his friend was my first pupil. Buddy played, and I watched his hands. Well, he knocked me right out. He did everything I wanted to do, and he did it with such ease. When I met his folks, I asked them who his teacher was. He never studied, they told me. They made me feel very good, and that made me feel very good. I realized that it was something physical, not only mental, that you had to have." Adler denied the rumor that he taught Rich how to play. "Sure, he studied with me, but he didn't come to me to learn how to hold the drumsticks. I set out to teach Buddy to read. He'd take 6 lessons, go on the road for 6 weeks, and come back. He didn't practice. He couldn't because wherever the guy went, he was followed around by admiring drummers. He didn't have time to practice. Tommy Dorsey wanted Buddy to write a book, and he told him to get in touch with me. I did the book, and Tommy wrote the foreword. Technically, I was Buddy's teacher, but I came along after he had already acquired his technique." When asked if Rich could read music, Bobby Shew, lead trumpeter in Rich's mid-1960s big band, replied, "No, he'd always have a drummer there during rehearsals to read and play the parts initially on new arrangements. Buddy would just sit in the empty audience seats in the afternoon and listen to the band. He'd only have to listen to a chart once, and he'd have it memorized. We'd run through it, and he'd know exactly how it went, how many measures it ran, and what he'd have to do to drive it." In a modern drummer interview, Buddy had this to say about practicing. "I don't put much emphasis, anyhow, on practice. I think it's a fallacy to believe that the more you practice, the better you become. You can only get better by playing. You can sit in a basement with a set of drums and practice rudiments all day long, but if you don't play with a band, you won't learn style, technique, and taste, and you won't learn how to play for a band and with a band. It's like getting a job, any kind of job. It's an opportunity to develop, and practice, besides that, is boring. I know teachers who tell their students to practice 3, 4, 6 hours a day. If you can't get what you want after an hour of practice, you're not going to get it in 4 days." In the same article, Rich also discourages playing drums with one's bare hands. When asked if he could do such a thing, he replied, "Yes, but why destroy your hands? I could think of 100 ways to use my hands rather than to break them on the rim of a drum." While Rich was married to Marie Allison, a dancer and showgirl, on April 24, 1953, until his death in 1987, they had a daughter in 1954, Kathy, who later became a vocalist and carried on her father's band. Rich was also cousin of actor Jonathan Hayes. He also lived in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. In March of 1968, he was convicted of failing to report $50,000 of income in 1961, and was given 5 years probation, fined $2,500, and in order to pay the IRS $40,000. In July of 1969, they placed a tax lien on him for $141,606 for back taxes. Rich filed for bankruptcy the next month, and the IRS seized his home in Las Vegas. Rich was notoriously short-tempered. Singer Dusty Springfield slapped him after several days of putting up with Rich's insults and showbiz sabotage. He had a rivalry with Frank Sinatra, which sometimes ended in brawls when both were members of Tommy Dorsey's band. Nevertheless, they remained lifelong friends, and Sinatra delivered a eulogy at Rich's funeral in 1987. In 1983, Rich underwent quadruple bypass surgery and was often visited by Sinatra in the hospital. Billy Cobham said that he met Rich in a club as a youth, asking him to sign his snare drum, but Rich dropped it down the stairs. Rich held a black belt in karate, which proved beneficial to him, his temper, and his health. At the time, Rich was prone to heart attacks and poor back structure, following a surgery removing 2 of his spinal discs. Rich had a strong dislike of band leaders. He claimed that the musicians hardly looked at the band leader and that the drummer is the real quarterback of the band. According to bassist Bill Crow, Rich reacted strongly to Max Roach's increasingly popularity when he was the drummer for Charlie Parker, especially when a jazz critic stated Roach had topped Rich as the world's greatest drummer. Drummer John J.R. Robinson told Crow he was with Roach when Rich drove by with a beautiful woman seated next to him and yelled, "Hey Max, top this." Nonetheless, the two worked together on the 1959 album Rich vs. Roach, and Roach appeared on the 1994 Rich tribute album Burning for Buddy. Rich's temper was documented in a series of recordings made on tour buses and in dressing rooms by pianist Lee Musiker, who concealed a compact tape recorder in his clothing while on tour with Rich in the early 1980s. On one recording, Rich threatens to fire trombonist Dave Penici for having a beard, and although he threatened many times to fire members of his band, he seldom did so, and for the most part, praised his musicians in television and print interviews. The day before his death, April 1st, 1987, Rich was visited by Mel Torme, who claimed that one of Rich's last requests was to hear the tapes of his angry outbursts. Torme was working on an authorized biography of Rich and included excerpts of the tapes in the book, but he never played the tapes for Rich. In Mel Torme's biography of Buddy, he notes that while Buddy was tough on his band, there were a few instances when some members stood up to him. One departing musician told Rich, "I came to this band to play music, not to join the Marines." Another instance was when an Australian musician loudly debated with Buddy in the bus. Torme was also familiar with Buddy's dislike of rock, but he states that when some of these rock drummers came to greet Buddy after a show, he was always charming and polite, and he never, at least in my presence, disparaged them in any way. Rich held a low opinion of country music, considered a giant step backwards, and the young people need to realize that there are a lot more to music than just playing 1 or 2 chords. During medical therapy before his death, a nurse asked Rich whether he was allergic to anything, to which he replied, "Yes, country and western music." We'll look at the death part later on. And okay, got a lot of here. We might actually have to put this in one part. Oh, okay. Well, let's now actually go and look at his death. This is going to be a part 1 only. Okay. So Rich toured and performed until the end of his life in early March of 1987. He was touring in New York when he was hospitalized after suffering a paralysis on his left side that physicians believed had been caused by a stroke. He was transferred to California to UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles for tests, where doctors discovered and removed a brain tumor on March 16th. He was discharged a week later, but continued to receive daily chemotherapy treatments at the hospital. On April 2nd, 1987, he died of unexpected respiratory and cardiac failure after a treatment related to the malignant brain tumor. His wife Marie and daughter Kathy buried him in Westward Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. He was 69. Since Rich's death, a number of memorial concerts have been held. In 1994, the Rich tribute album Burning for Buddy, a tribute to the music of Buddy Rich, was released. Produced by Rush drummer lyricist Neil Peart, the album features performances of Rich staples by a number of jazz and rock drummers such as Joe Morello, Steve Gadd, Max Roach, Billy Cobham, Dave Weckl, Simon Phillips, Steve Smith, and Peart, and accompanied by the Buddy Rich Big Band. A second volume was issued in 1997. Phil Collins was featured in a DVD tribute organized by Rich's daughter, A Salute to Buddy Rich, which included Steve Smith and Dennis Chambers. Rich's technique, including speed, smooth execution, and precision, is one of the most coveted in drumming and has become a standard. Gene Krupa described him as the greatest drummer ever to have drawn breath. Roger Taylor, drummer of Queen, acknowledged Rich as the best drummer he ever saw for sheer technique. Blink-182 drummer Travis Barker has credited Rich as the greatest drummer of all time. Rich's influence extends from jazz to rock music, including drummers such as Dave Weckl, Vinnie Colaiuta, Adam Nussbaum, Simon Phillips, Hal Blaine, John Bowman, Carl Palmer, Ian Pace, Greg Bissonette, Jojo Mayer, Trey Cool, and Bill Ward. Phil Collins stopped using two bass drums and started playing the hi-hat after reading Rich's opinion on the importance of the hi-hat. In 1980, Rich was awarded an honorary doctorate of music from Berklee College of Music. In 1986, a year before his death, Rich was elected into the Percussive Arts Society Hall of Fame in the category of band leader and drum set player. September 30th, 2017, he was honored with a star on the Palm Springs Walk of Stars. And then in 2016, readers of Rolling Stone magazine ranked Rich number 15 in their list of the 100 greatest drummers of all time. In a reader's poll in 2011, he ranked number 6. In his discography, you could see all the great stuff. He had great compilations and other good things going on. He was a known performer and endorser of Ludwig, Slingerland, and Rogers drums. And while endorsing Slingerland in the 60s and 70s, Rich sometimes used a Phibbs snare drum together with a Slingerland drum kit. He switched exclusively to Ludwig in the late 70s through the early 80s. And while recovering from a heart attack in 1983, Rich was presented with a 1940s vintage Slingerland Radio King set, refurbished by Joe McSweeney of M's Drums, which he used until his death in 1987. Rich's typical setup included a 14x24 bass drum, a 9x13 mounted tom, two 16x16 floor toms, with the second tom usually serving as a towel holder, and a 5.5x14 snare drum. His cymbals were typically a Vetus Zildjian, 14-inch new beat hi-hats, 20-inch medium ride, 8-inch splash, two 18-inch crashes, thin and medium thin, sometimes a 6-inch splash, and later a 22-inch swish. He also used Remo drum heads and Slingerland drumsticks. In episode 10 of season 1 of Archer, titled Dial M for Mother, Buddy Rich is named by Mallory Archer as one of Sterling Archer's possible fathers. And there you have it, friends. The great Buddy Rich on this episode 4 of the Legends of Smooth Jazz. Next week, we're going to be looking at one of the great percussion instrument players of all time. One of my favorites, Lionel Hampton. Yes. Oh, it will be very good. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky, and died in New York City. But he had a fantastic career from 1908 to 2002. At the age of 94, we'll look at his great work with the Vibes and the Marimbas all next week on episode 5 of this great program we call The Legends of Smooth Jazz. I'm Jason DeCanio, thanking you very much. And remember, be honest, be real. Keep it simple, stupid. Kiss. And we will see you next Saturday for episode 5 with Lionel Hampton. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.
Don't forget to subscribe to the David3000 Network for great more content like this one.